See? Told you I'd make it up to you. It is December and the temperature has finally dropped. You know what that means. Mommy is alive and she has come bearing gifts. That's right, children, because it is holiday season, and as a thank you for making this entire year so amazing for me, all of December is gonna be Style Study Month. Every single video over the next 4 weeks is going to be a highly requested style study because my Christmas gift to you is a forced level up in your art. And to kick things off, we're going to take a look at an artist that's actually very recently featured on this channel already, Ahmed Aldoori. I'm not a crazy stalker, I promise. You can blame my patrons for picking this one. Nah, I'm totally kidding. Ahmed is one of my all-time favorites, both as an artist and an educator. I feel like this is going to be a bit of a bold statement to make, but in my opinion, I feel like of all the artists that I've seen so far, Ahmed's work has the most character and personality. I'm not taking critique on that statement, don't even try it. This video has been requested a fair few times as well, so massive thank you to Fesh Gulu the Satanic Gamer and Juliet Rose for requesting this video. I hope you guys enjoy it and that it's everything that you've been looking for. If this is your very first style study, I highly recommend listening to the rest of this intro, but if you're a style study veteran and you know why you're here, you can go ahead and skip to part 1. Thank you so much for coming back, I love you, and I've left all of the timestamps in the video description. But if you're new, hi, welcome! I am so glad you're here because today we're gonna level up your art by like 1,000,000%. Style Study is a regular series we do on this channel where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work, and see what we can learn from it. Keyword, learn. We're not trying to plagiarize someone's work, only trying to see what we can learn from it and apply it to our own style. I usually structure my style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Ahmed's work, analyze his style, and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of his original paintings. The beautiful reference I've chosen today is this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. As always, if you enjoyed this video and are hyped for Style Study Month, then please remember to like, subscribe, comment for the engagement, come say hi on Instagram or Discord, and check out my Patreon for even more content every single week. Alrighty, whenever you're ready, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring Ahmed Aldoori. Ahmed Aldoori is a freelance concept artist from LA who, in my mind, is a titan in the art industry. He graduated with a bachelor's in entertainment design from the Art Center College of Design back in 2014, and since then he's worked on some big projects such as ArenaNet's Guild Wars 2 and Game Workshop's Warhammer. He was also crowned world champion in the Limits Digital Art Battle in Japan back in 2018. When I did the iconic video about how he paints skin, I feared that that was it. I wouldn't have much more to talk about in the style study. Boy, was I wrong, because this is on track to be my longest style study so far. Because while on the surface it feels like the main component in his work is that beautiful painterly skin, there is so much that goes into his work that actually causes you to focus on the skin and the face. I promise you there is a lot to learn today. His beautiful fantasy character art has garnered Ahmed over 293,000 subscribers here on YouTube and over 212,000 followers over on Instagram. Okay, so this is a little embarrassing to admit, but for the longest time I genuinely thought Ahmed's work was pure realism. This was before I knew anything at all about stylized work or digital art, and then I felt stupid, but then I realized, wait, there was a reason I thought that, because when you take a quick glance at his work, even though there may be fantasy elements in the scene, the rendering does cause it to look a lot like realism. But then when you look even closer at things like the proportions and color schemes and brushwork, that is when you realize that there is a lot of stylistic choice in every single surface that he paints. That said, however, I think we can all agree that no matter what the subject, there is a very specific effect in all of his work that makes it look like it's not of this time period. Either a scene looks ancient or it looks super futuristic. In either case, it is otherworldly, and I'm super excited to see just why, but I can tell you one thing for sure, he's definitely not a neo-realist. Speaking of Liz, here are 4 key characteristics to Ahmed's art. Before we get to the little details, the first thing I want to look at is the big picture, because even when we zoom out really far, our eyes pretty much always slingshot straight to the face. Why? Because Ahmed composes the scene in such a way that every corner of the canvas, it draws your eyes back to the character's face via a plethora of leading lines. You have your usual suspects in the hair, the clothing, and the background elements, all of which point directly at the face. However, there are actually a few leading lines that you'd never even think you would use in a compositional sense. The ears, for instance, if you look closely, you'll see that he often uses the helix of the ear as a leading line, either by extending it to look elf-like or by highlighting it while keeping the rest of the ear slightly darker. This causes the ears to basically act like very strong pointers that lead directly to the eyes. Another powerful leading line is the gesture. You'll often see that the neck, torso, and arms, or the legs and the back, create directional cues that lead straight to the face, even in a very simple upright standing pose. That's not all though, it's not just the physical lines that lead to the face. If you look at the lighting, you'll find that in a lot of the places, the shadows are placed in such a way that the face is very strongly lit and emphasized. Alternatively, he'll turn the well-lit areas into leading lines themselves, wherein if you follow some of the strongest highlights, even the specular highlights, they appear to either lead to or frame the face. But why would he go to these lengths to draw attention to the character's face? Because as human beings, we connect most strongly to things that have a face. Think about it, if there was a tree and a dog in front of you, which one are you gonna form an emotional bond with quicker, whether it is a positive or a negative emotion? Most likely the dog, because it has a face. We love faces, hell, we're biologically programmed to notice them because faces act as indicators of conscious sentient beings. In fact, a lot of our instincts and memories revolve around reading and remembering faces. It is a crucial part of our emotional and social makeup. But if we're pretty much instantly and automatically gonna notice a face, why does Ahmed also use all these other lines and cues to keep leading us back to the face time and time again? Well, it is actually a lot deeper than simply noticing the pretty facial features and rendering. When we first look at someone's face, believe it or not, it is actually a survival instinct. In that first glance, we're testing for familiarity. Do we know the person? If not, we might keep looking for a fraction of a second longer to determine whether it's a potential friend, a neutral stranger, or in some cases, an enemy or a threat. If it's just a neutral stranger, we're likely never gonna commit their face to memory. However, if we see a potential friend or a threat, our eyes tend to linger on their face a little longer, creating a solid memory. In other words, that character leaves a strong impression. We looked at the more fearful, threatening side of this in the Emelina study, where her characters draw our attention because they're scary. We also looked at the more friendly, almost protective side of this phenomenon in a few other style studies, such as the work of Ross Tran and Shao E, where we find the stylistic choices to be super attractive, super cute. With Ahmed's art, however, it is like you can't really pinpoint whether a character is a friend or a foe. They are conventionally attractive, no doubt, but there's almost no clues as to whether we're meant to love them or fear them. And yet, we have all these lines that keep bringing us right back to them, time and time again. This creates a very powerful sense of intrigue because it's almost like your subconscious keeps driving you right back to what is a neutral stranger phase, but you really can't figure out why. And just like that, you are now obsessed with the character. You know how I said Ahmed's characters seem to appear realistic, but when you look closer, they're actually very stylized? Well, I think this is due to how he stylizes the proportions of the face. Obviously, we have the usual suspects that we almost always have: large eyes, a small upturned nose, pouty lips, and a soft narrow jaw with a pointy chin. However, what is it that makes this face so different to a face painted by, say, Sam Yang? It is the positions. While Ahmed stylizes these features individually, he places them very close to how you'd place the facial features in a realistic face. So the eyes are about halfway down under the crown of the head, the mouth is halfway between the nose and the chin, and the ears are as tall as the distance between the eyebrow and the nose. But looking at the features in isolation, the eyes are big, round and beady, the nose is small and rounded, almost button-like, and the lips are plump and glossy. And this is what creates that juxtaposition, you guys, is that a quick glance at the overall bone structure causes you to think that it's a super realistic face, which pushes the believability. But then the features that lie at the surface are very stylized, which is something you only really notice when you come closer up to the face and look at the details. And it is pretty much the same thing with the character's body, where the bone structure is fairly realistic. The ribs are above the hips, the shoulders are exactly as wide as you would expect them to be, and the arms and legs are believable in length. But then you look at the surface details, such as how some areas appear super skinny, almost gaunt and knobby looking. The skin seems to be unnaturally colored or have gloss in areas where you realistically don't see any shine, and that is how you know there is a lot of stylistic choice involved. The one running theme through every one of his paintings, however, is definition. No matter what the character looks like, Ahmed always makes sure that their facial and physical features are very defined and stand out despite the wide expanses of skin. You'll see a lot of hard edges, strong silhouettes, and sometimes even tattoos or face paint that add sharp angles to smooth, rounded skin. This creates a lot of dynamism in the composition because angles and contrast automatically add a huge sense of movement, even if it is just a simple character standing up. Okay, you know how earlier in this video I mentioned how his scenes tend to be placed either in the distant past or the distant future? Well, obviously this is often due to the clothing and accessories. A character with flowing robes and face paint is gonna look like they belong in the distant past where humans were more primitive, whereas a character with a helmet and a mech suit is gonna look like they came from the future. But what about characters like this one who still looks like they belong in the future, even though we have no idea what their clothing is like? Or this one who, despite her very modern cut clothes, looks like she belongs in the past? What is it that pushes us to imagine a certain era of time, and why do none of them look contemporary? Well, first off, we need to look at the color palette. Pop culture has always fed us subliminal messages, creating associations in our brain that we don't even consciously think about. Warm yellows and reds seem to belong in the past. Think of the 1960s and 70s, where it was all about the big sunny homes with baking and home and hearth. We are taught to associate a lot of warmth with that era. But when we look at the future, we're taught that it is going to be cold and artificial and detached, very blue and purple. So we subconsciously associate warmer tones in art with the past, think Da Vinci, Rembrandt and the like, while we associate cooler tones in art to the future, think Star Trek and cyberpunk. However, you know me, I like to go even deeper and look at all the subtle details, so if you'll indulge me, here's one more thing I noticed that might contribute to a sense of time travel. A lot of Ahmed's art seems to be indoors. I'm not saying it is indoors, I'm saying even the sky looks like it's a ceiling. First off, it is rarely a very different value from the rest of the background, but secondly, I don't think think I've ever seen him paint a sky with clouds in it. So even if it is an outdoor scene, it looks like an indoor scene. But Srish, I hear you ask, what does that have to do with time travel? Well, if you really think about it, in pop culture, both the distant past and the distant future are set mostly indoors. In the past, humans had to stay inside a lot of the times because there was no protection from the elements, especially in the more extreme seasons. Besides, when they painted Renaissance portraits, it was almost always set indoors because it was just not feasible to paint outside. So you'll see all kinds of ornate furniture, walls painted with serious detail, and just loads of design elements to make the inside of a house look pretty, because that's kind of where people spent most of their time. When we think of the future, however, it is a little more scary, because in the dystopian land that we're pretty much all expecting, we've completely ruined the environment. There will be no breathable air, no potable water, and nothing in the outdoors that could sustain us. In the future, we're gonna be indoors out of necessity, and so a lot of dystopian cyberpunk shows will have very dark, cool-toned indoor scenes because there is no warmth from the sun. In either case, when Ahmed paints these scenes to be indoors or appear like they are, with heavy shadows and ambient occlusion, you're way less likely to associate it with our current world because, pandemic aside, we live a lot of our lives in synchronicity with the elements outside. So all Ahmed has to do is paint a bunch of indoor scenes and boom, you have time travel. Alright, so this is where I tell you to please go watch the other video where we looked at how Ahmed paints skin, because we do go a lot further into the actual painting process. But if you have already watched it, I want to remind you guys of how he uses hard and soft edges. Because if you look at any material Ahmed paints, you'll notice that there is this perfect balance of sharp edges and smooth blending. And in the iconic video, I mentioned how the edges of the highlight blend into a softer, rounder plane, but stay hard at the sharp plane shifts. But what about the other tones in the painting? What is it about how Ahmed shades things that makes them stand out so much? First of all, let's look closer at the hard edge tones. On the face, you'll see that there are actually many little in-between colors that make up all the super detailed dimensions and plane shifts. So you'll see a lot of brushwork, a lot of mid-tones that denote form and color and shape and lighting. There is a ton of hue shift, no matter how subtle and unsaturated. But as we move down to the rest of the body and the skin, the tones get larger and flatter and fewer in between. So instead of having like 70 midtones that you have in the face, in the rest of the body you'll have maybe 3. Instead of having detailed brush strokes within the same value, you have some airbrush type action. The rest of the skin is softer and less detailed. But when you look at the other elements in the skin, it gets rougher still, because in the hair and clothing and armor and background, there is little to no blending. It is all brushwork, flat tones overlapping each other. There are pretty much no defined objects with tiny details. It is all just super rough indications of what else might be in the scene. In fact, you can break the painting down into 3 categories using form and texture. In the center of focus, usually the face, but sometimes just the character in general, you have form and texture. In the immediate surrounding or adjacent bits, usually the body, you have form but no texture. And in the outer background and hair, you have texture but no form. As you can guess, this is yet another way to keep pushing your eyes back onto the face because it is the most believable, detailed part of the painting. Again, even in very subtle ways, he really causes you to form a strong, memorable bond with the character. So to sum up part 1, here are 4 key characteristics to Ahmed's art. Number 1, he uses all kinds of leading lines to keep your attention coming right back to the character's face. The characters, however, are often very neutral, neither obviously good nor obviously bad, which creates a sense of intrigue in us as viewers, thereby making said characters memorable. 2. He resizes and reshapes the individual features and surface details of the face and the body, but keeps their positions as they would be in a realistic human being. This causes a bit of confusion where they appear realistic and stylized at the same time, further enhancing that sense of intrigue. Number 3, the scenes almost always appear to be indoors, even if they are set outdoors. This, combined with very strongly warm or cool color palettes, causes the scene to look like it is set either in the distant past or the distant future. And number 4, Ahmed renders his paintings in such a way that the face has both texture and form, the body has form but little texture, and the background has texture but little to no form. This is another subtle way to keep your focus on the face, since it seems to be the most detailed aspect in the scene with both texture and form. For our study today, this is the beautiful reference that I'm using. This was a painting Ahmed shared last year, and from what I can tell, it was painted on Procreate. Bro, when I tell you I severely underestimated this reference, because while the sketching was pretty straightforward, like I said, he positions the features like you would see in realism. It was the shapes and sizes of these features that varied, so that was pretty easy. Where things went south is during the rendering, because when you look at how Ahmed paints skin, there is a lot of tiny increments and little hue, saturation and texture shifts that he kind of stacks on top of each other rather than going straight in and painting all the surface details at once. So in a lot of places I found that there was texture on the surface, but like a soft diffuse plane shift underneath, like at the highest point of the cheekbone at the zygomatic arch. And this was easier to achieve in the skin video because we went step by step, but you already know that when it comes to style study, especially when it comes to part 2, I like to look only at the end product and see if I can replicate it with my own techniques. I feel like this was a painting that waxed and waned for me, because at some points I loved where it was going, but at others I hated it. But that's like, welcome to being an artist, right? One thing I did notice, however, is that he interchanges between saturated and desaturated tones, almost using the saturation to show form. So a lot of desaturated tones kind of blend into each other to create a more rounded appearance, while saturated areas indicate stronger plane shifts. This is something I really struggled with, was trying to create all that texture without losing the form, but I feel like that's just how studies go. Also, the paler tones are noticeably less saturated than the darker ones, which gives you this ghostly, almost dead looking skin because there seems to be no signs of life in the highest planes of the face. All in all, there is a reason Ahmed has such a unique style, because Lord knows it is incredibly detailed and requires a lot of micro adjustments along the way. Here's the finished study. Let me know what you guys think, because I really don't know how it makes me feel. So, fun fact, this painting was actually a lot easier and quicker than the study, which is a rare occurrence for style studies. But in either case, I wanted to create a character that was fairly simple, maybe give her a jumpsuit and some red hair. You want to remember to use loads of leading lines though, because the focus needs to be entirely on the face, right? So I've angled both her forearms to point directly at her face, and even painted the lighting so that it is pretty much a strong key light right on her face. Again, we want to remember all the little details that can also be turned into mini leading lines, so the helix of the ear as well as the hair right at her crown can all be used to point towards the face. Plus, I'm rendering the neck and torso so that the bright area forms like a swoop that shoots up towards her face as well. With the skin tones, I want to go very bluey lavender while also adding a ton of hue variation. The paler tones are going to be less saturated, whereas we're going to use some very saturated midtones and shadow tones just to create some form. We're keeping the face super dimensional and textured, while her arms and neck and chest are going to have softer blending. The hair and the clothes in the background, on the other hand, are going to have loads of texture but pretty much no blending. I'm also keeping in mind the specular highlights in the skin, making sure they all point towards the eyes. With the background, I've kept it fairly simple. I started with a basic bilinear gradient, and then I grabbed a texture brush to color pick and paint over the gradient bits, just getting rid of the smooth blending there. I also picked some warmer tones from the character herself and echoed them in the background, so there is a good amount of color harmony as well. As always, you can watch me paint the entire character from start to finish over on Patreon, link is in the video description, but here is this week's original painting, A Respite. And there we have it, Ahmed Aldoori Demystified. Like I said, you guys, I did do a dedicated video on how he paints skin, or how you can paint skin to look like his, which I will leave in the cards up here if you haven't watched it. But I do hope you've enjoyed this video as well and learned something today. Thanks so much again to Fesh Go Gulululu, the Satanic Gamer, and Juliet Rose for requesting this video, and my lovely patrons for picking this out of the list. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and it's been everything that you've been hoping for. And if the rest of you guys have learned something from this style study, then please let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button, because like I said, it is style study month and you do not want to miss the rest of these. Are there any other artists you'd like to see a style study on? Leave them in a comment below and I'll add them to my ever-growing list, which is like 30 names long already, but I'll keep adding to it. Come say hi on Discord or Instagram, and if you'd like to support the channel, then please come check out my Patreon, grab a whole year's worth of extra content. All the links are always in the video description below. And finally, if this is your very first style study and you haven't watched the rest yet, I will leave a handy little playlist up here in the outro. Feel free to binge them all, there is so much to learn from every single artist that we've covered on this series so far. And with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'll see you next week with a brand new style study. Until then, happy style study month, and I love you. Bye!